Hello again, I'm Robert, and I'm here talking about the Pathscape Create software. And today we're going to specifically talk about how to use it to program your nLight Animate Controller. So for those of you with the Pathway Perform controller, there's not going to be much in this video for you this time. But for those that are working with the nLight wired network, there's going to be all kinds of discussion about how the nLight Animate can respond to output channels on the wire, how it can set scenes, global or local, preset or profile, and how you can control nLight loads like power packs or embedded fixtures with Wallpod Channels. So let's get into it. I'm going to have three little demonstrations for either scenes or wall pods or outputs. And right now I'm going to show you a building that I have created that has a lot of dynamic looks in it. And ultimately we're going to want to control this from a schedule on an Eclipse or an NTS touchscreen. So let's just have a look at what I programmed on this building facade. So we have a static look, which is called the US flag. And we have a color effect I call the exploding bullseye, color coming from the center and going out to the sides. We have a big strobe effect. We have a clock sort of sweeping all around the facade, big color sweep. We have a static look called a sunrise, very pretty. There's a whole variety of dynamic and static and timeline looks that I have programmed on this building facade. And again, what we want to do is we want to use the nLight wired network to turn these on at will. If we now switch over to sensor view, I have sensor view hooked up through an Eclipse. It could also be through an NCOM kit. Now you do not need an Eclipse to actually drive and animate. So on port 1, I have a number of devices. I have my Animate Controller. I have a Snapshot Controller. I have some NPod M's. I have a Neo that controls a white light. I have some 2-scene preset wall stations. And I have an NPod M right here in front of me that I called the Hall West. And this is a 2P. By default, if we look at our control channels, we will see that Hall West Pole 1 is broadcasting on local channel 1, and the second pole is broadcasting on local channel 2. And my tracking devices, Animate Output 1 of 16, is tracking on local channel 1. Now I could also have local switch channel 1. Not just control output 1 of my Animate, but, it could control 6 and 7. So this would be like turning on 3 different power packs or 3 different nLight enabled fixtures. But since I know that a single look on an American flag versus an electrical storm on the building encompasses the entire building, I'm just going to leave it on the default of output 1 tracking channel 1. Now I'm also doing my demonstration with switch channels, but as you know, every single channel in nLight is made up of the resultant of the switch channel, its occupancy on the same channel, and the photocell. So we could use a photocell when it gets dark to turn on a look on our building, or if it was in the lobby of our building, we could use an occupancy sensor to turn on, and when there's vacancy, it could turn off that specific animate look. But let's not get too heavy into programming sensor view and nLight. What we want to do is just show how my Hall West Pole 1 could trigger something in our show. So if we go back and look at our Create software, and I look at my US flag look, I can look at its properties, and currently it is triggered by nothing. If I ask it to follow the value of nLight output 1. And then I send this up to the device by uploading it. Now, whenever nLight output 1 goes on, we should see the US flag. Now, this is just my local simulation of the US flag. I don't have a building here to show you, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to scoot over to my device, select my device, I'm going to open up the web interface, and if we go over here now and log in to the web interface, we see the menu across the top here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the spaces, and we can see that everything is currently off. Now, if I take my nPod M, which is broadcasting on local channel 1, and I tell it to go on, then we see that it's gone into US flag. And through the magic of video editing, if I scoot back over to here, this is what the outside of the building would look like. Now let's choose another look. If we wanted to trigger a timeline look, which is this double halo. So if I wanted that to be triggered on switch channel 2, what I'll do is I will say, let's use output 2, and we'll scoot back over here to sensor view to remind you that local channel 2 is broadcast from my Hall West pole 2, and one of the tracking devices is the output of my output number 2 of my Animate. So all we need to do is go back into the Pathscape software, upload to the controller. If we scoot over to the web interface, we are still in the US flag. But if I press switch channel 2, we are now in double halo, which on the building ends up looking like this. Now it's important to note that if I take any other look and I want to trigger it to an output, the output just has to go above 0. So a non-zero value, regardless of its intensity level, will then fade in using this fade time that you set up here. So if I'm going from this electrical storm look to this ocean tide look, it's going to use the fade time that I have programmed with the Create software. So if I went from Mr. Blobby to Hole in Red, like that, I could change the fade time of, let's say, Hole in Red to 0.5 seconds. So if I was in Mr. Blobby, and then I go to the Hole in Red, it will happen much quicker. So again, if Hole in Red is being triggered by an nLight output, as soon as that output goes non-zero, it will respect the fade time that you have used in Create. So what do we do with the other 99% of a level? Well, there is something very useful that you may choose to do with the intensity level, and that would be to use it to control the intensity of an entire space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my spaces collection here, and I can't see them, so I'll go into the filter and I will turn on the spaces. I have the whole building, the right of the building, and the left of the building. Now if I go to the whole building and I say that its intensity should follow nLight output, let's say 2 in this case, and I send that up to the controller, if I go over to the web interface here, I can see that the building's general overall intensity is at 100%. And then using my nPod M, I can actually lower that percentage all the way down to 0. So now the outputs will actually track the level of the local channel 2 in this case. Now let's have a look at what it looks like to have the Animate Controller drive Wallpod Channels, which you can then use to drive nLight enabled luminaires. So to do that, I've got a different project loaded here. This is simulating a children's ward in a hospital with a nurse's station. And along the cove we have some linear RGBs, and along the front edge of the desk we have some more linears. But above we have downlights that are in the hallway, and they are all tied together with nLight like this, so they're all addressed the same. And then above the nurse's station we have them addressed like this. Now these guys, to make it interesting, are tunable white. So how do we patch those? So let's just turn on our patch, and we see that the RGBs are patched into DMX port A, like this. But to control nLight enabled luminaires, we need to patch them into one of the 16 wall pods on the Animate, so that it can broadcast that out on the nLight wired network. So let me grab this group of similarly addressed hallway downlights, and I will just drop that right there, and it is going to consume two adjacent nLight channels, Wallpod channels, because it is tunable white. The first channel is the intensity, and the next channel is the CCT. And then we'll take the nurse's station, all of those lights, and we'll put those on 3 and 4. Now, to make this more interesting, in the devices I have, of course, my controller, but I've also put in a 5-inch Pathway Perform touchscreen and built an interface that looks like this. So if we go in and simulate our project, here we are at the 8th floor west of our St. Joseph's Children's Hospital, and we can go in and control the hallway colors. So we could do a color chase like this, or we can change it to a clouds look like this. And on the desk we could do the day look, which is what we're in now. So we have relatively cool temperature here, much cooler above the work area for the nursing station. And if we go into evening, it warms up quite substantially in the hallways, still a little bit cooler above the nurses station. And then at late night we change the RGBs to something very muted. There's just a glow of light coming in the hallways, and probably about a 3000 Kelvin temperature for above the nurses station. We can also go in here and do manual control. So on the hallways we have an intensity override, so we could bring down all of the pot lights, or we have a cool warm override, so we can make everything very cool and everything very warm. I actually have a touch screen here beside me, and what we're interested in now is not necessarily the DMX, but we're going to go to the web interface again over here, and if we look, just for fun, we will go into the outputs of Universe A, and if we go into the 8th floor, we can choose a color picker, and if we choose reds, you can see we have, let me take the green and the blue right to 0. So we have a high value for red. My intensity master must be down. Let's bring that back up. So we have full red, no green, no blue. Full red, no green, no blue. Now, I could change that and bring up the green channel, and then we have 0 red, full green, 0 blue, repeating. But what's interesting is if we go and look at the nLight portion, and this time we're looking at Wallpods, and if we go live into the hallways, we could go into the day cool look. So the intensity, let me make sure it's at full. The intensity is at 100%, and the CCT is at 67%. And both this nurse's station, it's at 100% intensity, and the CCT is at full, which means it is as blue as it can get. Now I can manually go in and I can control the intensity, and I can bring that down, and you can see the intensity has cut in half. Let's take that back up to full, and here we have a color temperature chooser. So I could set both of those to about half. I could set them both to rather cool, so that is close to 100% on the 2 CCT channels. And if I make it really warm, that's 0 on the CCT channels. Finally, let me show you how you can use the nLight Animate to trigger scenes on your nLight network. Now you may have an eclipse and you decide to use global profile or preset scenes, or you may just define it locally with sensor view right on the device itself. So for this demonstration, let's have a look at what might be an elementary school cafeteria/auditorium. And you can see there are nLight enabled troughers up in the ceiling, and we have a bar of theatrical lights shining at the stage and at the drapes. And maybe upstage of that are some strip lights. So back in the Create software, I've decided to represent it like this, where I've just drawn the nLight enabled luminaires and ceiling mount occupancy sensors. And they're not going to be controlling the nLight luminaires with the Animate Controller, but the occupancy sensors will turn them on when there are people in the room. Now, when we are doing a theatrical show or a presentation or a speaker, we probably want to stop the broadcasting of the occupancy sensors for turning on the lights, and then somebody will turn them off with a Wallpod. So what we are controlling with the Animate Controller is the bar of theatrical lights, which I've drawn here, and the strip lights upstage. Now what we've also done is I've built in a bunch of preset looks. I'll just zoom over to them here now. I have a look called Speaker, that's a show type situation. I have one called Doing the Wave, which would also be a show situation. I have the school colors, and I have the big strobe effect. Now what's not in a show would just be a warm wash on the curtains, or just lighting up the curtains themselves, or a patriotic look. So let's zoom right out there. Let's go have a look in our devices. I have a Perform 5-inch touchscreen here. We can preview the touchscreen and just have a look at what we're doing. So in a show situation, I have a speaker. So basically we're lighting the curtains in red, and we have one light pointed downstage right, which will probably light up a podium, and nothing is happening upstage. Another show would be a very dynamic Do the Wave. So we have a blue and yellow wave that is matched upstage and downstage. And we also, using the same yellow and blue, we have the school colors that are doing a slightly different pattern from in to out. And when things are really exciting, we just do a big strobe where all the lights strobe in white. Now, when we are not in a quote-unquote show situation, I just have a warm wash button that just illuminates the stage so that people can walk on it. That's not a show situation, so it doesn't matter if troffers are on. So the occupancy sensors can do their thing up and down. We have one that just lights the curtains in red. Now, if you look very subtly, there is a little bit of a wave going on here. And we have, of course, a patriotic look where everything goes red, white, and blue, and the off look. So how do we ensure that the occupancy sensors will stop broadcasting? Well, we go into sensor view and we define a profile called showtime, which will turn off occupancy tracking. And then we go to our nLight device. We choose a scene that we want and we assign that profile to it. So now all we need to do is anytime we are in a look that is a show situation, we want to activate scene 4. So back in Pathscape Create, let's just have a look at the properties of some of these looks. So this speaker look will trigger nLight scene 4, and so will do the wave or school colors or strobe. And I'd like to show you another way that you can actually get to this is you can hit this under control, configure nLight button, and hit the nLight scenes and go to scene 4. And then you can add in the different looks that you want to trigger scene 4. So I could add in the warm wash as well if I wanted to. And now I would have 5 different looks that would trigger scene 4. So how do we see how this is working? Well, we can look at sensor view. When we go to the status screen, we can see that scene 4 is currently idle. And back over on the Animate web interface, if we go to the nLight tab and we go to the scenes, we can actually see that scene 4 is on look 2, look 4, look 3, and look 7, called Big Strobe, Do the Wave, School Colors, and none of them are on stage presently. Now, if I go to my touch screen, we can see that we are in the off state. As soon as I go to one of the show looks, you can see the web interface says that the speaker is on stage and it has set this scene active. And if we go over to sensor view, we can see scene 4 is active here. Now if I go to the off scene on my touch screen, scene 4 immediately goes idle. And on Animate's web interface, we can see it is no longer active. Now I could activate any other one, like Do the Wave, and the scene will go on. And again, looking at sensor view, you see the scene is active. Then I can just switch to which look is on stage. And I can do that quite rapidly here, and you get the feedback immediately on the web interface. Now there is another way of triggering scenes, and that is with conditions. Now in this show file, I have set our location to Atlanta, Georgia, and that gives me longitude and latitude and time zone and daylight savings on and off, summer and winter. And I have configured a conditional called day or night, and that happens at sunrise and sunset. So the interaction between conditions and setting a scene is done in configuring nLight here, and we choose the conditions to set the nLight scene. We choose the scene we want, and then we set the condition to be either daytime or nighttime. So whenever it goes to nighttime, scene 5 will go active. Now back in sensor view, I have configured scene 5 to turn the parking lights on and off. So if we go to status here, we can see it's currently idle. Now if I go on the touch screen, I can jump the clock and I can change daytime to nighttime, which sets scene 5 active, and then as the clock rolls over to daytime, the scene will go idle. So this has been a rather long video describing how Animate can interact with nLight wall pods, nLight outputs, and nLight scenes. Thanks for sticking with me. See you next time.